the ghost town where California's oil empire was born. The true story of Mentryville, California, and the well that pumped for 114 years. There is a narrow canyon in the mountains just north of the City of Angels, steep oak and sycamore walls, dry chaparral, a creek that runs only in winter, where, if you know where to look, the ground itself leaks oil. For thousands of years it simply seeped up out of the rock, black and slow, and pooled in the bottom of the canyon. The native peoples of these mountains, the Tataviam and the Tongva, gathered it and used it as medicine, long before anyone thought to drill for it. The Spanish who came later called the place Pico Canyon, after a famous California family. And then, one autumn day in 1876, a French immigrant with a homemade drill struck oil here and changed the entire future of the state. Most people who drive the freeways around Santa Clarita have never heard of it, but hidden at the end of a quiet canyon road sits a near-perfect ghost town, a 13-room mansion, a 1-room schoolhouse, a weathered barn, all that's left of a place called Mentryville. This is the town where California's oil industry was born, where one of the largest companies on earth got its start, and where a single, well-pumped oil out of the ground without stopping for 114 years. This is the story of how it happened and how it was very nearly lost. Long before the drillers came, people knew there was something strange in this canyon. The oil seeps were no secret. The native peoples had used them for generations, and when the Spanish and Mexican ranchers settled the valleys nearby, they knew about the dark tar that bubbled up out of the hills. The story goes that in 1865, a Mexican hunter named Ramon Perea was tracking a wounded deer when he came upon one of the springs, a pool of thin, dark green oil unlike anything he had seen. He thought it might be worth something, and he was right. But Perea never saw the fortune that came out of these hills. By one account, he traded away his entire claim for a barrel of liquor and a single $20 gold piece. For a while, nothing much came of it. California had lived through a brief oil rush back in the 1860s, but it collapsed almost as fast as it started. Eastern oil from Pennsylvania could be shipped in and sold cheaper than anything the California wells could produce. Dozens of companies drilled, spent fortunes, and got almost nothing back. The canyons sat quiet. The oil kept seeping. And everyone more or less agreed that there was no money to be made in California crude. Then, in 1875, a small outfit called the Star Oil Works decided to try again. They had a lease on the seeps in Pico Canyon, and they needed someone who actually knew how to drill. They found him in a man named Charles Alexander Mentry. Mentry was a French immigrant who had learned the oil trade the hard way in the booming fields of Pennsylvania before coming west to California. He was stubborn, mechanically brilliant, and exactly the kind of man this job needed, because drilling in Pico Canyon was almost impossible. The railroad had not yet reached the area. There was no real road into the canyon. Water was scarce. Proper tools were scarcer, and the machinery he needed simply did not exist out here. So Mentry built his own. To make a drill stem strong enough to punch into the rock, he bought old iron axles from railroad cars, hauled them out to the canyon, and welded them together by hand. He drilled 3 wells that showed a little promise, and then he started on the 4th. They called it Pico No. 4. Mentry began boring into the canyon floor in the summer of 1876, and on the 26th of September, a few hundred feet down, he struck oil. It flowed steadily from the start. Later that year, he deepened the hole, using what may have been the first steam-powered rig ever run in a California oil well. And this time, the oil came up under such pressure that it shot clear to the top of the 65-foot derrick. Production jumped to 150 barrels a day. For California, in 1876, That was a fortune coming out of the ground. Pico No. 4 was the first commercially successful oil well in the American West. It is remembered simply as the birthplace of California's oil industry. The strike set off a second oil rush, and this one did not collapse. Within a few years, the painted canyon was crowded with wooden derricks perched on hillsides so steep that men joked you could stand a road on its end. To turn the raw crude into something useful, the company built a refinery a few miles away, in the little town of Newhall. That refinery still stands today, and it is believed to be the oldest surviving oil refinery anywhere in the world. To move the oil, Mentry built the first oil pipeline in California, a 2-inch iron pipe running 7 miles from the canyon down to the Newhall refinery and eventually stretching 50 miles all the way to the coast. And the company that owned it all kept growing. The Little Star Oil Works became the California Star Oil Works, and then it was folded into a larger firm called the Pacific Coast Oil Company. That company, in turn, became Standard Oil of California, and that company is the one we know today by a single familiar name, Chevron. One of the largest oil companies in the world traces its roots straight back to this one quiet canyon, and to the well that a French immigrant drilled with railroad axles. As the oil flowed, a town grew up around it, and it took the superintendent's name. They called it Mentryville. At its peak, around the turn of the century, something like 100 families lived there, clustered in the canyon below the wells. There were boarding houses and bunkhouses, a bakery, a blacksmith shop, a machine shop, a social hall, and a one-room schoolhouse called the Felton School, which still stands. Mentry himself built a grand 13-room mansion at the head of the canyon, the finest house for miles. But Mentryville was unlike almost every other boomtown in the West, and the reason was Mentry himself. He ran a tight, almost puritanical camp. He banned hard drinking and foul language, and famously, in a desert oil town full of working men, there was not a single saloon. What there was instead was strangely genteel. A tennis court, lit with natural gas so the men could play after dark, fields for croquet, and a main road paved with the local asphalt. The whole town was lit and heated by the natural gas that came up alongside the oil. Mentry treated his workers well, and in all the years he ran the field, it never once suffered a strike. And then, in 1900, it all changed in a matter of days. Mentry fell ill with typhoid fever. He was taken down to a hospital in the city, and there he died. He was only 53. What happened next tells you everything about what this man meant to the people who worked for him. When word reached the canyon, the entire town, more than 200 people, packed up and traveled down to the city for his funeral. Every single resident went, except for 3 souls left behind to watch over the place. And they carried with them, all that way, an enormous floral arrangement built in the shape of an oil derrick, a final tribute, in flowers, to the man and the machine that had built their whole world. Mentryville outlived its founder, but not by much. The oil never fully stopped, but it slowed, year by year, and the industry changed around the little canyon town. The big money moved to bigger fields. Slowly, the families drifted away. And here, the story turns familiar, in the saddest way. Through the 1930s, the people who left did not just lock their doors and go. They tore their own houses down, board by board, nail by nail, and hauled the lumber off to build again somewhere with a future. One by one, the homes of Mentryville simply disappeared. By the early 1960s, it was a true ghost town. A reporter who hiked in found rusted oil equipment scattered across the canyon, toppled derricks rotting in the brush, and a cemetery so overgrown it had nearly vanished. Only one family still lived there, a caretaker and his children, rattling around inside Mentry's old 13-room mansion, the last lights burning in a town that the world had forgotten. But Mentryville, like a few lucky California towns, had someone who refused to let it vanish. In 1966, a caretaker named Frenchy Lagasse moved his family into the old Mentry mansion. The oil company that owned the land wanted to tear down what was left, to clear away the rotting derricks and the empty house and be done with it. Lagasse talked them out of it. He asked to be allowed to restore the place instead, and they let him. Working with the local historical society, he patched up the mansion and the schoolhouse, and he began giving tours, walking visitors through the ghost town and telling them how the whole thing began. And all the while, just up the canyon, Pico No. 4 kept pumping. Decade after decade, long after the town around it had died, that first well kept lifting oil out of the ground. A barrel here, a barrel there. It ran through the Depression, through 2 world wars, through the space age, until it was finally capped in 1990. By then, it had produced for 114 years without stopping. It is remembered as the longest continuously operating oil well in the world. The 1990s brought one more round of trouble and rescue. The Northridge earthquake in 1994 badly damaged the old mansion and forced Lagasse out at last. But the next year, Chevron, the corporate great-grandchild of Mentry's little oil works, donated the town and some 800 acres of the surrounding canyon to a public conservancy, so the place would be protected for good. A group called the Friends of Mentryville formed to keep restoring it. Even then, the canyon kept testing them. A fire in 2003 nearly burned the historic buildings to the ground, and a storm the next year flooded them. But each time, the town survived. Today, Pico Canyon is a public park, and you can walk right up the canyon to the spot where it all started. The 13-room mansion still stands, white and proud, at the head of the valley. The little Felton schoolhouse still stands beside it. You can hike the old oil road up to the site of well number 4 and stand where the West's first great oil strike came roaring out of the rock. And here is the strange final chapter. Because Mentryville looks so perfectly like an old western town frozen in time, Hollywood discovered it. Film crews have used the canyon and its buildings for decades. It appeared in Steven Spielberg's The Color Purple and in television shows from Murder, She Wrote to the X-Files, a real ghost town, playing the part of imaginary ones. And so Mentryville carries all of it at once. The seeps the native peoples gathered for medicine, the hunter who traded a fortune for a barrel of liquor, the stubborn French driller and his railroad axle rig, the well that launched an industry and the company that grew from it into a giant, the Puritan boomtown with its gaslit tennis court and no saloon, the funeral wreath shaped like a derrick, and the long, slow fade, and the handful of people who simply refuse to let the canyon take it all back. There are towns all over California that boomed on oil and gold and silver and then blew away like dust. Mentryville should have been one of them. Instead, because a few people would not let it disappear, it is still standing in its quiet canyon. A 13-room mansion, a 1-room school, and a capped well on the hill that once changed everything. Many people will never visit Mentryville. Many people never knew any of this happened. But now you know. That's the story of Mentryville, California. And we're just getting started. If this is your first time here at Los California, welcome. Every week, we go deep on the towns, the disasters, the scandals, the forgotten stories, and the hidden history that made California what it is today. Subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and leave a comment below telling us which California city or town you want us to cover next. We'll see you there.